Hi, I'm J.John. I'm here at the Evangelists Conference and I'm delighted to welcome Senior Pastor Tim Dilena from Times Square Church to give us his third talk.
And then he told them, "Go into all the world and preach the good news to everyone."
Scars tell stories. You could look upon your body and probably see a scar that was caused by something that maybe was irresponsible. Maybe something, I've got sports scars on me. I've got from my childhood scars that has been covered up just through the ages, through age. But scars will tell stories. And sometimes they'll tell irresponsible stories. Sometimes they'll just tell childish stories. But if there's ever a scar story that has always impacted me, it's what happened in that Detroit church, the one that we bought, the XXX movie theater. My associate pastor is an amazing man. His name is Kevin. We just finished a conference at that church in Detroit, and it was a youth conference. It was called Warwick. It is a very unique conference. We'd bring youth pastors and youth groups from all over America. They'd come together. We'd have sessions in morning and night and all afternoon. You evangelists will just drool at this. They were all in ministry all day long, working the streets. So it's like, we want you to be imparted, but now you've got to use it on the streets. So we would send them out for 3 hours every single day. We finished the conference, and after we finished the conference, I flew at the end of it to Minneapolis, Minnesota, to interview a possible staff member. Kevin, the associate pastor, who lived one block over from Cindy and I, him and his wife Sarah, took their 2 children and went to another state because they were going to get a break and get a little vacation. Then I get a call at 4 in the morning while I'm in Minneapolis in a hotel, and it says that Kevin is in the hospital. And what I found out was that in the middle of the night at 3 o'clock in the morning, someone who was looking for drug money to buy cocaine broke into Kevin's home while he was there by himself, crashed through the front window. Kevin heard it, and while he was coming down, the man went into the kitchen and took the largest kitchen knife. And as Kevin was coming down, the man was coming up. The man jabbed the knife into his stomach and started to tear away. They fell, and all of a sudden, he started chopping at the back of his neck and then on his face. 37 times Kevin was stabbed. It was a horrific moment. And Kevin tells the story that as he's laying there in his blood, there was so much blood loss. The man was robbing him. There was so much blood loss that he was laying down and he was saying his final prayer to the Lord. His final prayer was, "God, don't let my children be bitter with ministry." That's what he was praying. And then he started to have regrets, he said, "And God, forgive me, because my wife, Sarah, and I had a fight before we left, and I should have made up with her." And it was at that moment, Kevin said, it was like an audible voice. He heard a voice that said, "Get up, they still need you." And he didn't know what that meant, but he said it was an audible voice. And somehow, without trying to be so graphic, he held his intestines in place, stood up in this giant pool of blood, and by the grace of God, made it out the back door while the man was robbing him. Got to the neighbor's home. The neighbor said that was in the report, they couldn't even recognize him. They had no idea his ethnicity. They couldn't tell whether he was black, white, Hispanic, or Asian. He was so covered with his own blood. Finally, the police, the ambulance came, took Kevin to the hospital. 37 stab wounds. He was brought immediately into surgery. That's when I flew in, when he was going into surgery, and Sarah came up at the same time. And so we're hearing then the stories. Remember, scars tell stories. And so what we found out was this. We found out that 37 times this man stabbed him, and every one of those stab wounds missed a vital organ of his body. What in the world is that? They said, "You win." The surgeon said, "You win. You have the record at the hospital," is what they told him. Then the police came and started to look for the man that broke in and the man that did this. And Kevin shared with me later of what was in the police report. This is what they said was in the police report. When Kevin got up, he said, we don't understand. We have a missing piece in the police report that we don't know what to write. He said, when you stood up in that pile of blood, the blood loss was massive. He said, we were surprised that you even had the strength to get up. But then he said this, he said, when you stood up, we see in that puddle of blood, in the police report, your size 10 shoes or feet. Now, he didn't have his shoes on. Feet in the blood. He said, but to get to the neighbor's house, there's no footprints. We don't know where the footprints are that got you to the neighbor's house. How many have seen that footprints in the sand? Okay. This is the updated ghetto version, is what this is. This is called footprints in the blood, is what this is called. Well, we know who got Kevin there. And Kevin has on his body 6 feet of scars from his face, his neck, his stomach, all over his body. And every inch of his body tells a story. God is a miracle worker. It's every time he looks at it. Kevin is now not only stayed in the city that he pastored with me in, but now he is working. It's an amazing ministry, and he's able to tell his story. Total forgiveness. That R.T. Kendall really, if there's a story of total forgiveness, it is Kevin. Because when he stood at the courts and they asked him to give a victim statement, he said, I will not do that. He said, I will give a victor statement. And he stood up at that court and pronounced forgiveness on the man that stabbed him 37 times. That's what he did in court. Instead of pointing at him, he gave him to Jesus and said, I forgive you. And in fact, there have been moments that he has taken care of their family with Christmas presents. That man's family is what he has done. And now he is ministering on death row to people that only have some years and some months to live. And he tells them his story, is what Kevin does. And is when he's standing and talking to these men and women on death row, don't you know that every one of those scars are speaking louder than his words? And Kevin has a story to tell, because that's what they do. Those scars tell stories. And to think, how does Kevin get into that? How do those doors open up to him? Can you imagine, when you think about it, if God would have told Kevin, in order for me to give you this platform, I'm going to have to take you through this. No, thank you. That's what it would have been. In order to have a voice here, I have to take, because what we focus on sometimes is the reaping season, but never understand what God has to do to prepare us for that. And we see that in people's lives. Folks, before I got to Times Square Church, God had to do something in my life for really 38 years. The only thing that's good about that is I was 2 years better than the children of Israel. That's the only thing that's even good about that. God goes, I want you to go to Times Square Church, but you need 38 years of lessons to get this through. Think about this. Think of Joseph for just a moment. God is so smart, he'll never tell you the process, he'll tell you the end. He's so smart. He doesn't tell Joseph, okay, your brothers are going to betray you. They're going to throw you into a pit. You're going to be sold into slavery. Then they're going to go ahead and you're going to be accused of something. And then all of a sudden, you're going to be thrown into prison. And then you're going to interpret dreams in prison, all this stuff. And God never said any of that to him. All he saw in a dream was people bowing down. Like when people have visions, it's usually the end of the dream. I see this, people bowing down, people doing this. That was it. If God told him the process, it wasn't a dream, it was a nightmare. And so that's why he would never even tell him that. And when I look at Joseph and I see how God used him, I want you, this is as a side note, because we'll come back to Joseph at the end. I want you to write down these 3 things, because God's classroom to prepare you is always different than man's classroom. It was A.W. Tozer who said, it's doubtful whether could use a man greatly unless he's wounded him deeply. It's doubtful whether God could use a man or a woman greatly unless he wounded him deeply. Joseph had 3 tests to prepare him for prime minister, to be second in charge of a nation, to give him the platform that he was going to do. It's a school that he may be putting some of you in. Let me just give you the 3 tests. Here it is, what God did. This was the classroom. Number 1, betrayed by your closest friends. Betrayed by someone close to you. It's betrayal. Betrayed by your closest friends or closest people in your life. Number 2, accused of something and you can't defend yourself. Accused of something and you can't defend yourself. And number 3, promises were made to you and promises were broken. Let me give them to you again. Betrayal by your closest people in your life. Number 2, accusation. Accused of something and you can't even defend yourself. You can't go online until you're part of the story. And number 3, it's going to be promises made and promises broken. Think of those 3 words. That this is God's classroom sometimes to prepare you for what he wants to do. And I wish God uses conferences to prepare you, but what he wants to do, he'll use a conference to encourage you. But preparation, the cutting, it usually happens through betrayal, accusation, and broken promises. That's the part. I wish I could just go to conferences and be ready, but it just doesn't happen that way. And some of you are here and understand what these mean. Let me just take them for a second. Betrayed by the closest people in your life. Write these words down. Hurt is proportional to intimacy. Hurt is proportional to intimacy. That means that the closer you are, the more it hurts. And the less they have to do for it to hurt. I've been shot at. I've been cursed at. I've preached on the streets. I've had bottles thrown at me. I've had everything you can imagine preaching on the streets around the country. Everything you can imagine. None of that. I don't even know those people that are throwing. That doesn't matter to me. I've been spit at witnessing to people. But if my wife looks at me with a little side eye, I'm done. At that moment, it's like I'd rather you shoot at me who I don't even know you. I'd rather than get the. That's hurt is proportional to intimacy. Number 2, accused of something that you can't defend yourself. There's moments that that it will happen to every one of us. That everything in you wants to go online, to go on social media, to defend yourself, and to give yourself a platform to tell your side of the story. Here's what's emotional about this, about Joseph. Joseph is accused of rape when in actuality he showed purity. And here's what's amazing. This is the part that gets emotional. I just finished Genesis because it's January. And so we just finished Genesis. And the emotional part is this to me. When Joseph becomes second in charge of the kingdom of Egypt, this is what's amazing. I'm telling you, thank God I wasn't in that prison because I would have left with Paul in Acts 16. And thank God I'm not Joseph because the first home I would have went to when I had my robes on was back to Potiphar's house, and I would have knocked on the door and going, guess who's going to jail? That's what I would have said. But here's what's amazing. Joseph let God defend him. And Joseph lived with the reputation that he was a rapist in Potiphar's house and never corrected the story. He let God cover his character. He let God tell the truth for him. That's the hard part. And finally, promises made and promises broken. This is while he's in prison. 2 of Pharaoh's employees are put there, the cupbearer and the baker. They both have dreams. That always makes me laugh, is that they have dreams and come to Joseph, and dreams got him in jail. If they came to me, I'm going, hey, don't worry about it. Those dreams really don't pan out the way they look at. So don't even worry about it. But Joseph, what's amazing is Joseph still interprets dreams without a business card, without a ministry title or a website. He still ministers because if the gift is there, you don't need a title or a platform. It can happen in a secular job and even in jail. God can use you. That's what makes it amazing to me. Is Joseph is a dream interpreter, whether he's second in charge of the kingdom, whether he is at home as Joseph, the son of Jacob, or whether he's a convict. And what's incredible is this, is that in literally as the dream that is coming to fruition, it looks like it's going like this. That's what it looks like. I'm going to be in charge. And I'm thinking, with the coat of many colors, I'm really close. And then it's a pit. Then I'm sold into slavery. Then I'm accused of rape. Then I'm thrown into prison. And the 2 guys promise, the guys I interpreted their dreams, they'll remember me to Pharaoh. And he tells them, he says, please remember me to Pharaoh. And they look and go, we got you. And the Bible says in 2 years, that he's left there in prison. For 2 more years he's left there in prison. And all of a sudden, in one day, when Joseph looks least like the dream, God puts him in the position. How in one day you go from a convict in an orange jumpsuit with a number, and now you're wearing royal robes? Because promotion doesn't come from the east or the west. Promotion comes from God himself. That's where it starts. And there's a scarring that happens in this story that I'll share with you at the end. But I have to tell you this one other scar story, and this is what I really wanted to really walk you through here. Let me just do a little test with you just for a second. Who was the first king of Israel? This is not a trick. This is not like I'm going to give you some Hebrew name. What's the name, first king? Saul, absolutely. Who's the second king? David. Third king? Fourth king? This is the important one. It's Rehoboam. Rehoboam, and the reason why this one is important is this. This is where the kingdom splits. This is where it turns into Judah and Israel. This is where Chronicles and Kings begin to get a little bit confusing, because you're wondering, am I reading about Judah or am I reading about Israel? Who am I reading about here? It is, let me pause here for a second. Let me speak for younger people, but even for older people for just a moment. We said yesterday, who do you have in your life that knows you? N-O. Rehoboam becomes king at a young age, and here's what happens. He asked wisdom of the elders and asked the elders, what do you think I should do? These were their words. He says, you need to serve the people. If you serve them, they'll serve you forever. Then the Bible says he talked to his peers, his friends, and they said, you tell them, my father whipped you with scorpions. I'm coming stronger than that. And you're the one in charge. And the Bible says he despised the advice and counsel of the elders and went after the counsel of the young people. Listen to me for a moment. We have a phrase that we use. I want you to get this phrase down. You not only use it for your kids, you need to use it for you. Cindy and I do this. Rehoboam did something, but he didn't complete it. When you need wisdom, here it comes. Here's your phrase. Process up. Yes. Process up. What does that mean? Find someone with more years, more mileage, more journey than you. Here's the worst thing. These are the 2 worst counselors. One is to process with your peers. They're just as dumb as you are. I've told that to my kids. When my kids was wanting this app, we always told them, process up. So I'll never forget, one of our girls comes in and we said, you ask. And she goes, I processed with my friend Paris. I said, Paris? She knows nothing. She's as mindless as you are. You can't do that. We said up. David Wilkerson used to call it talking to gray heads, cotton heads. And the problem is I'm becoming a cotton head without even knowing it. The second worst person to get counsel from is the Trinity, me, myself, and I. Is when all you do is you think that your counsel of yourself is really what I'm going to do. And that's the question. But people who don't have anybody that knows them have nobody to process up to. What do you think about this? What do you think I'm supposed to do? What do you think? What's your advice on this? And that's so important. And so Rehoboam, because he processes up, doesn't heed it, listens to his peers who are always going like, oh, you the... I don't need that. I don't need this. I don't need bro. I don't need that. Don't need bro. I need no. Don't do this. That's what I need. I don't need someone to pat me on the back. I need someone to tell me the truth. I need truth tellers in my life is what I need. So Rehoboam splits a kingdom because he listens to the wrong advice. And for 450 years, it's split until it's brought into Assyrian captivity and Babylonian captivity. We talked about Esther. That was so thank you, Rehoboam. We got Esther and all of them because of Rehoboam's bad decision. And here's what's amazing. When you look at this, 450 years, it was Israel that had 26 kings, and every one of them were wicked for 450 years. Every one of them. Judah had 27 kings. 3 were okay. That said that they would serve the Lord except they left high places. They would do this. But there was 2 kings that they called revival kings. And those names were Josiah and Hezekiah. Those were the only 2 kings in 450 years that brought a change. I want to talk to you about one of those kings' scar stories. I want to talk to you about Hezekiah's story for just a moment. It's a story like Kevin's was outward scarring. Joseph's was a little bit inward, and Hezekiah's was both. Let me read to you Hezekiah's story. This is 2 Kings chapter 18. Now it came about in the 3rd year of Hoshea, the son of Elah, king of Israel. You're going to see the split kingdom here come up. That's Israel. That Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, king of Judah. You see the 2 nations. That's Rehoboam's doing. That's Israel and Judah. Became king. Verse 2. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abi, the daughter of Zechariah. He did right in the sight of the Lord according to all that his father David had done. He removed the high places, broke down the sacred pillars, cut down the Asherah. This phrase just gets me. He also broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made, for until those days the sons of Israel burned incense to it. And then some genius said, let's call it a name, and let's call it Nehushtan. So do you understand what just happened? I want to pause there for just a moment, because this, I think, is important. That what he went after, the first thing he goes after, is something that God used with the children of Israel, but they ended up worshiping it. God used that bronze serpent that Jesus talked about in John chapter 3. It was the serpent that when they started grumbling, that all of a sudden all these snake bites came. Then in Numbers 21, God said, build a bronze serpent, and if you look, you'll live. One of the verses that Spurgeon talked about that was so important in his conversion. Look and live, look and live. And all of a sudden, some genius thought, let's pack the serpent up and then let's carry it around for 700 years. And let's call it a name, Nehushtan, and let's even burn incense to it. There's such a danger when we've lost sight of Jesus and all we've done is exalted a method. And what we've done is we thought that it worked here, then this is the way it's supposed to be done. Folks, can I just tell you, it's the exalting of a method instead of the message. It's exalting that going, listen, I grew up at a time in the Pentecostal church in New York City where I was born. Our church was across the street from Madison Square Garden called Glad Tidings Tabernacle. My parents would tell me the stories when Smith Wigglesworth used to come there and do healing services there. But I was raised in a church that if you put drums in there, that was the beat of Satan. Or a guitar. Oh my goodness, you're from hell. And so it was just none of that. It was an organ and a piano, and that was it. That's all you had. And all of a sudden, we've exalted methods and forgot Jesus. And that's what he goes out. Okay, that was just free. But let me just go on here for a second. Now, here's what it says in verse 5. He trusted the Lord, the God of Israel, so that after him there was none like him among all the kings of Judah. And there was no one who was before him. And when I read that last part, that was the part that got me. And I thought to myself, man, who raised that boy to do that? What kind of parenting would you have that you're going to raise a revival king? In a nation that has known nothing but judgment, now you have a revival king. How does that happen? I told you our prayers for our kids every night. God protect their virginity. God protect them physically. God protect their destiny. And I got kids that want to intermarry each other. And we have problems. And so as we're trying to raise kids, I'm going, God, I want to do what this guy did. I want to do what Hezekiah's dad did. How do you raise a revival generation? How do you raise a revival son that looks differently than all the other kings? What did his dad do? So let me tell you what I did. I took my Bible and I said, let me find out what his dad did for him. And maybe I can get and have some principles on what to do in raising a kid, raising children in New York City, and making sure that these are revival kids, that you would do the same for your children and your grandchildren. So when I'm looking at this, I'm saying, what did Ahaz do? So what I did was I turned back 2 chapters, and I found out about his dad. Let me read this to you. It was so insightful. So go just back to 2 Kings chapter 16. And look at this now. In the 17th year of Pekah, the son of Remaliah, Ahaz, that's Hezekiah's dad, Ahaz, the son of Jotham, king of Judah, became king. Okay, all's great. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, reigned 16 years in Jerusalem, and then, oh my goodness, look at this. And he did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord. Stop right there for a second. Now I'm a little bit confused. He's being raised by a non-Christian in a sense. To say he didn't do what was right in the sight of the Lord was saying this is a pagan man now. So the revival king Hezekiah, who no king would be like him before or after, is not being raised by godly parents. He's being raised by an ungodly man. And if that's not confusing, let me really mess things up. It's verse 3. That's what it says. But he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, and he even made his son, singular. Who's his son? Hezekiah, pass through the fire, according to the abominations of the nations, whom the Lord had driven out before the sons of Israel. Oh, my goodness. The revival king was raised by an ungodly dad, but it's verse 3 that shocked me. He made his son pass through the fire. So I'm going, okay, so let me then go backwards again. One of the great ways of going through Scripture is let Scripture interpret Scripture. And so I'm trying to go through to find out what it said. And I would see the phrase, but I couldn't find out what this meant. I would see the phrase and I'm going, I still don't know what this means. We are going to build, we have a Bible school. Times Square Church is a Bible school in Pennsylvania called Summit International School of the Ministry. 70% of our school is internationals that come from all over the world. And it's with joy that I've given the school from years of all books. And then when you move to New York, you have no space. You have no real estate. We live in a small apartment in Manhattan. But I gave the school some 32,000 books to build a library. And we're building a library for my dad. And it's called the Captain Paul Dilena Library. And on the cornerstone, we'll be building it in the next couple of years. It'll say, "Let the man preach." And we'll be in there, and it'll be that moment. But in those books, there are 2 books that I found on the bottom shelf of a used bookstore in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And it was the only 2 books that even addressed this. In fact, it was written by a Scottish man that many of the older commentaries use his material. These 2 giant books that are enormous, 2 volumes. And it's called Daily Bible Illustrations, John Kitto, Kitto. And John Kitto addresses what does it mean for Ahaz to make his son pass through the fire. John Kitto says in his book, he said to describe what this meant was, he said this was an idol. It could have been Chemosh or Molech. He said it would have been some 35 feet tall, maybe, or maybe to put it in another language, maybe about two of these ceilings going straight up. They said the bottom of it would look like the hind legs of an animal. The torso, the middle part, would be human hands held out. And the final part would be the animal again. And they said it was made out of brass. It would be hollowed out. And they said at the bottom they'd put the fire. And then Kitto would put these eerie words in there. They said when they would light the brass, it would glow so much. It said that the neighboring cities would see the sky change color and say they're making their children pass through the fire. And what they would do is this. Kitto tells us that the priest would take the child of the king and put it in the burning arms of this idol. This little child, little Hezekiah, would put him in the arms of this child, of this idol. And I'm thinking of my 4 children, I'm thinking of my 2 daughters that are with us here, that they would take that little baby, strip that baby down, and put it in the hands of some demonic priest that would walk up some steps, place it in the glowing arms that were burning with heat of this idol. And then at that moment, it would be that child would be squirming and screaming and shouting, and you're looking on as a dad. How wicked can you be? And that child would wiggle itself out of the arms and fall into the burning flames. And it's at that moment that they would grab the child out, and they would decide at that point whether it was rejected or accepted. If the child died, it was accepted by the gods. But if it lived, it was a reject. Folks, look at me for a second. That little boy is the king of 2 Kings 18. That revival king is the little boy that the father put on the arms of a burning idol. That little boy was the one that he would think that his dad would be the one that his hands would not hand him over to a priest, but his hands would be the one that would go, "I'm so proud of you." Or his lips would be the one that would kiss him. His voice would be the one that would say to him that you're going to do something. And the hands and the voice that you would trust would turn you over, sabotage mind, soul, and body. And now he is sacrificed on this and rejected by the community. And think of it for just a moment. Because it's not a priest and it's not an idol today. But the hands that were supposed to hold you were the hands that abused. Or the teacher, or the minister, or the parent that was supposed to speak words of life or saying, "You'll never be anything. You're stupid. You'll never do anything with your life." And you're expecting this, and every one of those words puts you in these hands of this burning. And what it does, like that little child that's squirming, you can imagine it squirming and scarring coming to the child, the back of its legs. Maybe it turns over and scarring coming across the front of its body. And every one of those scars reminds you that my dad doesn't care. My dad gave me over to that. And that child is now rejected, falls, I'm guessing, halfway down as the priest begins to bring that child out. And that scarred, burnt boy that survived this horrific thing is now the king. Because though his earthly father said, "You're a reject," there was another father that says, "I accept you to be the next revival king that is going to turn a nation around." That though rejected here, you will be accepted this way. And there are some that are sitting here today trying to do ministry, and you've been dropped. You've been scarred. You've been wounded. And you're trying to do ministry, and you're trying to be an evangelist, and haven't even addressed this. Rejected by your father, but accepted by the Father. Because he had something that he was going to do. It was a sequel that was never supposed to be written because the main character messed it up. It's considered one of the top 10 sequels of all time. And it was the second movie that followed Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back. George Lucas writes it shortly after and puts Empire Strikes Back. But what people don't realize is Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker, had this motorcycle accident that almost took his life, that disfigured his face. And in fact, they were deciding, do we scrap the movie or do we find somebody else to play Luke Skywalker? Because his face there's so much reconstructive surgery, we're a little concerned that it's just too different from episode 4 to go into episode 5. We're not even sure if we can do that for Empire Strikes Back. And then all of a sudden, it comes to him. George Lucas goes, wait, I'm the author. I'm the director. I can write in a provision on this. So we'll start the movie differently than we thought. We'll put it on an ice planet, cover his face so nobody will ever see it, And then all of a sudden, while he's riding that kangaroo on steroids through this ice planet, there's going to come an abominable demonic snowman who's going to rip his face, hang him from a ceiling. So when you see Luke Skywalker, you're going, oh, I know why your face is messed up. It's because of the demon snowman that got you in the cave. You didn't realize it was a motorcycle accident that he almost messed up everything at that point. But the author and the, let me add, finisher began to write in the script and said, I don't have to recast and I don't have to cancel. I just have to write in a couple of extra chapters because you are needed in this next season of your life. That's what happens. That's what God does. Now get this. And we're going to close shortly. You can minister with scars, but you can't minister with wounds. You can minister looking at the scars, but you cannot minister with wounds. Genesis 45. Let's go back to Joseph. Let me read you some passages and tell you one last story and we'll close. So Joseph, whose brothers betrayed him, brothers sell him into slavery. Famine comes, and all of a sudden, after 22 years, Joseph's brothers show up. They don't recognize Joseph, but Joseph recognizes them. And so while the brothers are standing before him, they go through kind of this host of back and forth, and we told a little bit of their story over the last day. But what's interesting was it's the moment that Joseph is about to reveal himself to the brothers that betrayed him, the brothers that sold him into Egypt. And I have to read to you about a man that had wounds, but now they're scars. And there's an answer here for some of us. Listen to these words. Genesis 45, 22 years after the pit and the selling into slavery and the betrayal. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I'm Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers couldn't answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, please come closer to me. They came closer, and he said, I'm your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine had been in the land these 2 years, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth, to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Now therefore it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to those, and the Lord of all the household, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Verse 9, hurry and go to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all of Egypt. Come down and do not delay. You don't sense wounds in there, though there may be scars. But here's what I've learned. From that interaction, I've seen how wounds turn to scars. Here it is. Or how you can know if it's become a scar. Listen to this, because you may have missed it. Because what Joseph did you notice how many times Joseph said God in that exchange? Look at this for just a moment. Look what he says. He says, verse 5, don't be grieved or angry with yourselves. You sold me here. God sent me before you. Verse 7, God sent me before you to preserve for a remnant in the earth. Look at verse 8. Now therefore it was not you who sent me here, but God sent me here. Verse 9, go and tell my father and say to him, thus says Joseph, God has made me Lord. You know when you know that the wound is a scar, is you don't talk about the people that put it there. You talk about God that has turned the whole situation around. He's not going, you put me there, you did this, why were you so jealous? When you have sitting with people over breakfast, over lunch, and over this, and they're still talking about what happened 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that's a wound. You can't minister from that. But when you understand God turned it around, God began to bring healing, that's when you know that the wound became a scar. And listen to me now, evangelists, because God wants to take wounds and turn them to scars, and then finally, he wants to put a robe on the scar. That's what he does with Hezekiah. Hezekiah is not a bitter man on the throne going, I'm going to get even with my dad. And my dad put this in me. That's why this has happened. I'm telling you, God, by his mercy, wants to change wounds to scars. And then he wants to put a robe on the scars today. It's the wound to scars is his healing power. It's when you know it's what God has done. And you're not blaming other people. There are seasons in our life that Cindy and I have been through. That is, and here's the part. Listen carefully. Do you know it scoured our soul and turned a wound into a scar from people that we trusted, from betrayal and accusation? Is when we have done this, I think now for 9 years. For 9 years. Cindy's nodding yes. 9 years. Listen to me. We have prayed every night that God would bless them. And that God would touch. You know what that has done? It has scoured our soul. We haven't prayed, God, let the real story come out. God, tell the truth about this. We've said, God, bless them. And the more we've prayed that, God has blessed us in the middle of it. God has done something inside of us. Something has happened in our soul. He started to turn a wound into a scar. And then he begins to take a ministry and puts a robe on those scars. You can minister from scars, but not from wounds. Because if you hear them, if it comes out, remember what they did? Remember, if there's a name that all of a sudden you hear that name, you're going, oh, that's what they did. Let me tell you a story about them. There's something not right. He takes wounds and turns them into scars, and then he puts a robe on those scars. On Monday, we took our kids to Oxford. I had the privilege of studying there. Michael and I were talking about that as we were there back in 2008. And I brought my kids to where we stayed. They don't even remember because all of four of them came, but they were so little. And we were right across the street. We had an apartment right across the street from Magdalen College where Lewis taught. And we would tell them stories, and I had friends that were living at C.S. Lewis's house because it was a dorm at that time for Wycliffe Hall, and so they were putting some of the students up there. So I was asking, can we come up there and show the kids this is C.S. Lewis's home? And there was like a closet. They're going, is that the wardrobe? And you just go, yes, that's the wardrobe. Looks like a closet. It's a wardrobe. That's what they call it in England. And so we were wonderful time. Of all the things, it was in fact while I was there, it was the second part that they came out in the movies, and we watched Prince Caspian came out, and I remember us eating at Eagle and Child and then going to the movies and watching Prince Caspian. We made it a C.S. Lewis night. Of all the things that Lewis wrote, there's a 90-page book that's probably my favorite, and it's an allegory. It's don't you purists, don't build anything into this. It's just an allegory, okay? And it's called The Great Divorce. The Great Divorce is just a 90-page book, and it's about a bus ride from hell to heaven. And it's Lewis, to some degree, wanting to show that if you go to hell, you're not wanting to be in heaven. And he was trying to show, and so the whole book is about a bus ride from hell to heaven. It's the ending that got me. And this is where we close. As Lewis is closing the book, all the people are getting back on the bus, but there's this one guy that's lingering. And on top of his shoulder is like this figure, this demonic figure that's on his shoulder. And this Christ-like figure comes out and looks at that thing and says this. He says, I can take that from you. And the man goes, no, I'm fine. I'm just going to get back on the bus. I'm going to go back to hell, and I'll be fine. And then again, please, let me take that from you. And then the thing starts to speak. And the thing goes, don't let him do it. It's going to hurt. Don't let him do it. No, I'm just going to get back on the bus. And he reaches out again and says, let me take that from you. And then the demon says this, I'll be good. I won't say a word ever again. I'll just sit here. And he says, I won't. And then all of a sudden, he says, let me take that from you. And he grabs that thing off the shoulder. And Lewis writes in his own inimitable way. He says, you see smoke and screaming. And he says, all of a sudden, this demon figure turns into this beautiful white stallion. And instead of the man getting on a bus back to hell, he rides a stallion into the glories of heaven. Look at me, evangelists. Don't walk out those doors back to hell. Don't walk out there with this thing going, remember them, remember this. Look at me. He can take that from you. He can take that from you. He can take, let him turn a wound into a scar. And let him put a robe on those scars. This doesn't mean anything to keep speaking with that junk inside of you. It doesn't mean whether you can evangelize all of UK if you're not whole. Then what you're doing is you're spewing instead of preaching. He's got to bring healing. It's going to come out. But here's the good thing. Don't leave this place. Let him take that from you today. He's able to. Wounds to scars. And then he puts a robe on those scars. He takes a revival king full of scars and says, you're going to change a nation. You could be here, look at me folks, in a man's eyes, all jacked up and still have a robe on side of you. My parents were this. Gotcha. I came from a dysfunctional family. Welcome to humanity. We're all dysfunctional. Can we just realize that today? We're all messed up. But some of us have let wounds become scars. And then he puts a robe on those scars. Bodies left to call.